Today's edition of Business Africa is about innovation and the will to take on the existential challenges facing African economies. Welcome, I'm your host, Afolake Oyinloye. The top stories this week. African countries and the global south in general have always had reservations about the burden and the extent to which they can take on climate adaptation practices. Did COP27 hosted on the African continent address some of these concerns? We'll find out shortly. Gabon has taken on the ambitious but stubbornly elusive goal of value addition over exportation of raw materials. What challenges stand in the way, and how prepared is the government to address concerns of key stakeholders in the lucrative sector? We have the report. University students from Ghana are among the winners of $100,000 to develop prototypes addressing global challenges, including climate change, inclusivity, and food security. It is clear that one of the key distinctive features of Egyptian-hosted climate summit is that the voice of emerging market has been brought to the fore. It is reflected in the issues being discussed, for instance, loss and damage being on the official COP agenda for the first time ever. Have a look at the summary.
The COP27 Summit has ended in Egypt with nearly 200 countries racing to strike a deal to avoid the worst effects of climate change. According to a statement by the organizers, it is estimated that the world will require between $4 and $7 trillion per year to shift towards sustainable development and meet agreed targets. The issue of loss and damage funding was introduced in the agenda for the first time after pressure from more than 130 developing countries. Germany, Austria, the United States and others pledged a few $100 million in funding to help low-income nations adapt to escalating climate emergencies. At last year's UN Climate Summit, all countries agreed to set tougher climate targets this year to keep average global temperature rises to the 1.5 centigrade limit that scientists say would avoid global warming's worst impacts. Faced with a global energy crisis and a looming economic downturn, only around 30 countries have pledged to stick to this target.
Leslie Ndolovo, CEO of Africa Risk Capacity Limited, joins us for more on that report. It's lovely to have you on the show. Now, adaptation gaps, especially in developing countries, are widely driven by widening disparities between the costs of adaptation and financing available for adaptation. As the summit comes to an end, what solutions are driven from it?
My solution there is that we don't need to divert funding away from mitigation towards adaptation, but in fact, the funding that is available in the entire ecosystem needs to be significantly increased. There we see a much bigger role for the multilateral development banks to play, such as the African Development Bank and the World Bank, indeed. But then also there is a big role for the private sector to play as well. We have started to see some flow of investments into adaptation projects via green bonds or climate-linked securities. But then this is what really needs to be done at a much greater scale. And I'm delighted to say that the conversations at the COP now start to address some of these issues that have been lingering for a while. And through working together at the level of the private sector and the public sector, I believe that we are taking the first steps to address the problems.
There are many uncomfortable questions, suggestions, and solutions that revolves around climate change effects and the burden borne by the global south versus the global north. You've been at the forefront of adapting to climate change. What are your takeaways on this subject?
The question for us is, how are we going to scale up our insurance programs from 30 million people per year that we currently cover to the 700 million people that need it? So we would like to see more funding available for governments to finance insurance premiums. There was a major announcement made by the G7 to create this global shield against climate risks. this global shield is going to include a component of funding for insurance premiums. This will make insurance more affordable, more accessible, and more available for vulnerable communities in Africa. So I view this as the first concrete step that has been taken to address the loss and damage issue. Then there is also a historical component to this, which I think has been quite rightly made, that the reason why we are seeing this drastic impact of climate change is a result of polluting actions that were taken by the industrialized countries in the past. So therefore, there is also then a climate justice discussion that needs to be had regarding how this is going to be addressed. But this is a more political question than an economic question.
Thank you. I'd like to touch on the news from India, where the country proposed a net zero strategy by 2070. I'd like to have your thoughts on this.
India has put forward a very interesting idea, which works for their own specific context. And I don't see it in any way as diminishing, I think, what is going to be a very good outcome in terms of the COP, but it is a way of providing additional solutions that are well adapted to the context of developing countries. Because when you look at Africa specifically, there is an energy deficit that exists on the African continent. Renewable energy can definitely play a big role in terms of closing that energy deficit, but then we cannot switch from one set of fuels to another overnight. There has to be a transition period, and it is up to each country to determine their own strategy for this energy transition, and indeed how long it's going to take.
Mr. Ndlovu, it's been delightful to have you on the conversation.
All right, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
Libreville hosted its first edition of Industrial Days to put Gabon on the path of sustainable and inclusive industrial development. According to the government, this event aims to present the level of progress of the industrial landscape and the country's investment opportunities in order to improve the competitiveness of the sector.
Gabon is shaking up its economy. The government has embarked on a vast plan for acceleration and transformation, also known as PAT, which, it says, will anchor the country on the path to sustainable and inclusive industrial development. At the recent National Industrial Days conference, stakeholders discussed and proposed sustainable solutions to the obstacles to competitiveness. Among other recommendations, I would like to highlight the political will demonstrated by the entire Gabonese administration to put in place mechanisms to promote local industry on a large scale and to implement and strengthen a business environment that is improved and secure. One of the pitfalls in the implementation of the PAT is the set of taxes it attracts. Exasperated by what they describe as abusive controls, members of a coalition of trade unions are asking the government to rationalize administrative procedures and to avoid duplication and unnecessary checks outside of the regulatory control protocols. The health service, for example, charges fees without issuing receipts, which means that something doesn't add up with the taxes. There continues to be a disparity in taxes paid on local versus imported products. One step the government is taking is to locally produce the main component of cement to reduce taxes on the product. The post-COVID-19 era, marked by the war in Ukraine, offers a window of opportunity for the Gabonese government to make do with its own resources. Our duty is to work to develop local industry to its full potential and to create shared prosperity. Gabon is developing processing businesses around the extractive industry, aiming to create local added value rather than exporting raw resources.
This year's edition of Prototypes for Humanity features interesting innovations addressing global challenges like environmental sustainability, while at the same time dealing with deeply personal and intimate issues like pregnancy tests for the visually impaired. In this report, we share highlights of the spectacular event that showcased 100 future-looking solutions at the Dubai International Financial Center.
One of the hopes of the organizers of the first edition of the Prototypes of Humanity was to showcase innovations that would transform academic knowledge into real-life solutions, and that has now been met when university students from across 100 countries exceeded their expectations by showcasing 100 powerful solutions, prototypes and technologies that addressed global and local challenges.
We see, for example, a pregnancy test that allows women with visual impairment to understand the results, a chair that can be converted into a raft in case of flood emergencies, a barrier that prevents plastic waste from going into the ocean, a defibrillator that can be used everywhere, powered by a mobile phone.
AcoFresh, an innovation from Ghana, is a green cold chain solution that is offering sustainable food preservation to extend the shelf life of perishable crops from 5 to 21 days to reduce post-harvest losses, thereby combating food waste. Up to $100,000 is to be given out in prizes across 4 different categories, including environment, health, society, and corporate solutions.
And that's all we had for you on Business Africa this week. As always, share your feedback with us on social media at Africanews. For more business stories and news, stay tuned to Africanews and africanews.com.